So, welcome everyone. How is everyone doing?
Yes, those are the only places.
Good. So, how was the keynote today?
We don't have any budget at SEO or STO.
Great. So,
handled the money.
So anyway, again, this topic is about open data, its evolution. So, we have a great panel here who have been the pioneers in the open data field in the state of California, and they are leading the efforts taking us to the next level. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for being here, Jan, Scott, and Scott.
Thank you.
We're separated.
That's good.
So the panel that we have here is, hopefully this would. So we have Jan Ross. Jan has been the CIO of California State Controller's Office prior to her current job. So her current job is with the State Treasurer's Office, and prior to that she was at State Controller's Office as the CIO. So at State Controller's Office, Jan led the efforts of Open Data Initiative at the Controller's Office, and she continues to lead that effort at Treasurer's Office. So government transparency is something that Jan is passionate about, and continuing those efforts. Scott Gregory is the Deputy Director at Department of Technology. He is the person who led the GIS portal, the statewide geo portal, and also currently leading the efforts on statewide open data portal initiative. And Scott Christman is the CIO of OSHPD, and Scott has been instrumental in the efforts with the CHHS data portal. His focus is on health data as well as outcome based reporting. So thank you for being here. And by the way, my name is Savita Farooqui. I am CEO of Symsoft Solutions. We work in the open data digital experience area and try to bring together content data so as to tell a cohesive story. So jumping right in, today we have more than 2,500 open data portals worldwide, and this number is growing by the day. If we look at the state alone, at the state level we are 7 open data portals, and I'm sure that most of you are familiar with these open data portals, and the data sets in each of those portals again is growing day by day. What that means is we do now have a lot of open data, and if we go back to the initial objective of why this movement started, it started with transparency as the big focus. So now we do have a lot of data, but do we really have transparency? Have we achieved that goal? The transparency's dictionary meaning is about openness, accountability, and the condition of being transparent. But at the same time, we have realized that the open data and the transparency agenda we haven't accomplished it. So here is a story from Government Technology magazine, where one of the cities who ranks pretty high on the open data census, they have 1,000 data records, but out of those only 132 were the real data records, and out of those 86 were a single budget report split into 86 different pages. So again, going back to the question of did we achieve transparency, what was the intent, what is the quality of data, and what is the context of data, and that makes a difference when we go from being open to being engaging. So what we are trying to accomplish here, and this panel would discuss it, is the being open is not really being transparent. We want to take the transparency to the level of engagement and really be truly open and accountable. So with that context, we want to start this discussion. So maybe Jan, if I could start with you.
Sure.
So when did you start your open data initiatives, your work in this particular field, and what were the objectives?
Well, we started with transparency, at the controller's office, and there had been a sort of a crisis of trust in the government in the city of Bell, a small city in Southern California. Through one of the controller's audits, it was discovered that several of the professional government officials were holding more than one position, unbeknownst to the taxpayers who were paying their salaries, because they held them by different titles. And so through the audit, we found this out and put those positions and those salaries together and found that about 8 people were earning close to $1 million on the backs of a very economically depressed city, and those people who were paying those taxes had no idea. So with that, John Chung was then the controller. He said, in 90 days, we will have a transparency site up that will show all of the pay that any employee in a county government is receiving. And we didn't do it by their name, so we protected the privacy, but we did have all of their HR departments report it by box 5 on their W-2. So we put identifiers on there. If you were holding multiple positions, you could key on that and you could see how many positions were held by one person, and then you could see how much salary they were earning. So that was up in 90 days from the audit findings, and that was in 2010. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, we embellished it until we had all of the county, all of the city, all of the special districts, all of the judges, all of the K through 12, junior colleges, CSU, UC, fairs and expos, first 5. If you are in California receiving a paycheck on the backs of the taxpayers, your position is out there on this site. And if you want to visit it, it's publicpay.ca.gov. And the idea was not simply to put the salaries out there, but to make it engaging so that anyone who isn't a data scientist but who just cares about their community could go to the site and say, I live in Sacramento County, or I live in the city of Elk Grove, or I care about the Sacramento Mosquito Abatement District and how much I'm paying in taxes to them. And so you could get down to a very granular level and see exactly what those salaries were. We had a heat map on there, so you can just look at California and see where the concentrations of the greatest salaries are. And we have some slicing and dicing tools so that you can get in to see the highest top 10 salaries in any of those government entities. So that was our first entrance into it. John Chung had said when he first took office at the Controller's Office in 2007 that he wanted to make all of the revenues and expenditures of every city accessible on the internet and not in PDF. So after we launched Public Pay, we then went to By the Numbers, and bythenumbers.sco.ca.gov is a open data portal of all of the revenues and all of the expenditures of every city, county, and special district throughout California. So if you want to see, for example, revenues received in the city of Sacramento or the county of Sacramento, or spent on airport improvements when Sacramento's airport was improved, all of that's reflected. And again, we didn't want to just launch data sets. We have a map of California. We have invitations on how to interact with the data, but Chung had always felt very strongly that government needs to be accountable and transparent. So that's how we got into that.
Right, yeah. So basically the objective was transparency and accountability.
Correct.
Awesome. So Scott, if you may.
Sure. So at the Health and Human Services Agency, I think we'd also looked at transparency, but I think it was a little bit of a different take. It was kind of an acknowledgement across the 12 departments of Health and Human Services that there's a tremendous amount of data that is collected and managed there. And an acknowledgement that a lot of that is sort of locked up in formats like PDF and not as accessible as we'd like. So I think the interest in accessibility kind of drove our original efforts, and likewise the interest in pursuing a data initiative across all 12 departments. What I mean is, and certainly probably not surprising, is that each of those departments, typically worked independently and pursued its own kinds of initiatives. initiatives, this was kind of the first opportunity for the Health and Human Services Agency to say, hey, all of the Health and Human Services data sets that are managed, and there's a volume of those, are important. Those are assets, they're of value, and there's going to be value that accrue, beyond what we're using them for in government. And it's our commitment to get those out there in open formats, not just basic posting to the web, but really providing open access and the availability of an API and those kinds of opportunities. So, that was our original push, and it was an incremental approach. We started in the summer of 2014, focused a lot on process in terms of governance and a repeatable process that we could go and work with every single department. And so, that was our approach. And, ultimately by the end of 2015, so about 6 months back, we ended up having all 12 departments aboard. So we can say, we have a single face Health and Human Services, but you can get it those assets from the 12 departments.
Great, awesome. Yeah, so basically, based on what you discussed, I think there are two audience groups that we are looking at, right? Making the data open to the technical community who wants access to raw data versus general public or citizens, businesses, etc., who want the information that the data provides. So would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we found in our experience was that definitely civic technologists, civic tech community was very interested, and we partnered with them in a number of regards. The media was incredibly interested. That's been a significant relationship that we developed, because again, obviously, media often rely on Public Records Act requests to get to data. This is a much better approach by simply making as much of the data available as possible, and then media would be able to grab those and use them for any sorts of journal. And then, of course, other local community activities, advocacy groups or nonprofits, local health, things like that. Folks that are interested in forming, topics locally make use of the data in that way.
Thank you. Scott, do you want to talk about when did you begin?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and it's interesting to hear my fellow panelists, and we all kind of began at similar points in our journey around open data. For my office and some of my efforts specifically within California, we began working back in the latter part of 2011, 2012, working directly with the governor's office to develop what we call the state's geoportal. And you can imagine, geospatial technology has been used for decades, over 30 years within California. There's a tremendous spend on geospatial data because it's not cheap, and management and overhead of that it can be quite expensive. So we needed a way to be able to articulate what our geospatial data portfolio was, what it is, where we can project it to go, and be able to catalog and manage and curate that information. So we're not reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. Well, in doing that, in some of those initial efforts, what we realized is that we were really beginning to plant the seeds for a broader discussion and conversation around government transparency and information transparency for the taxpayer. So fast forward a couple of years, there was a reorganization within state of California government. We were once an agency, California Technology Agency, now we're California Department of Technology, and we fall under the Government Operations Agency. So I had the good fortune of working with several folks within our agency to define a strategy and an approach for the state of California to develop and deploy an open data platform, working with partners like Jan and Scott and others that were represented in one of the slides that Savita had shared, to look at a comprehensive approach to share and expose important data that then becomes translated into information. Because it's our belief, and I'm sure that many of us share that same belief, is that when information touches the lives of individuals, it becomes really, really important. When individuals need access to information quickly, efficiently, rapidly, and in an intuitive and understandable way, that's the sweet spot, and that's what we keep driving towards. So we've, for the past year, have been engaged in a pilot effort, that we've learned a tremendous amount in terms of what it takes to really look at rolling out a statewide platform. And one of the key elements that was derived out of that was this notion of federation. We'll be the very first to say that we are not experts in health-related information or fiscal-related information, but our role in this is to come to the table as a technology partner to be able to manage a platform that can then federate to these other wonderful areas of expertise that are clearly standing up some incredible capabilities. So that pilot for us will be ending in the early part of August of this year, and a lot of the lessons learned there are going to be implemented into a future direction of where the state will go for open data. So there's certainly going to be more to come in that regard.
Great, awesome. Again, going back to Jan, do you want to share some of the success stories? What came out of it? Did you did the open data portal surprise you in some ways, that you initially started hoping that these are the results you want to accomplish, but then later on?
Sure.
Yeah.
So when we launched publicpay.ca.gov, the intent was just to provide a one-stop shop where citizens could come and see how their tax dollars are being spent, and then compare them to any other like entity. So you could go city to city and compare what the fire chief is making in one city to another, or the city manager to another, or county to county. And we developed a strong relationship with the media, like Scott mentioned. For those entities who didn't initially report, the media took that on and said, you know, in the Orange County Register, this city did not report. As a taxpayer, you should care about this. And that created an upswell of interest. And so that was one of the relationships that emerged as a government to citizen engagement opportunity. And then we were notified by several HR groups from various counties that they no longer commission salary studies. It used to be annually when they would go to the bargaining table with the unions to bargain salaries for a specific classification. Every year they were paying salary studies, consultants to go out and conduct salary studies for like kind of government entities to see what they were paying for those positions. And they had become so dependent on publicpay.ca.gov, they've abandoned the salary studies, and they get the information from that, and they can use that very reliably. And we were completely unaware of it. So that was a government-to-government benefit, and it became so critical to the ongoing viability of these people going into the bargaining agreement process annually. One of the legislators introduced legislation that the site could never go down. It had to be up 24/7, not even taken down for maintenance. Happily, that legislation did not pass. It's only down for small windows of maintenance. But it surprised us by how important something that we had built for one purpose had morphed into many other benefits for citizens and governments alike. And we had a similar experience with By the Numbers. By the Numbers was to provide the transparency into the revenues and how they're spent, the expenses, for all of these government entities. And if you're a data scientist, or if you've spent a lot of time reading the previously hard copy phone book size reports that the controller received, you might be familiar with it. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about getting into that data or determining why it was of interest to them. And then we were contacted by some staff from Mayor Kevin Johnson's office who said, we want to make sure we're using By the Numbers the correct way. We are trying to determine if there's an opportunity to, through a tax opportunity, to fund a professional soccer league stadium. Mayor Kevin Johnson had said we would not raise taxes on the citizens of the city of Sacramento to fund a professional soccer league stadium. So they went out to the site and they looked at the hotel tax rate. It's also called transient lodging tax rate, and they compared what Sacramento's charging for that hotel tax rate compared to event cities of like sizes, so San Francisco and San Diego and several other like cities. to see what's the differential, what's that gap between what Sacramento is charging for hotel tax rate versus event cities. And they found that, in fact, there was quite a difference in those, and a funding strategy emerged. Where they went with it, I don't know, but what we were able to validate was, yes, you're using the site correctly. That's exactly what one of the benefits. And we did not anticipate that when we built the site, but we saw that by enabling them, not just putting data sets out there, but providing, here's how to interact with the data, here's some invitations to engage with it. We helped them self-discover and self-serve, both as citizens and as government entities.
Yeah, great. So basically enabling informed choice both for government entities and citizens and businesses and communities.
And beyond what we had anticipated
right,
when we built it. So that was exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Scott, do you have any success stories you want to share?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I don't know if it's as impactful.
I think, sorry, just to interject, I know you talked about ca.gov portal this morning. And one of the things when we talk about open data, what comes to my mind is it is not always the structured data, but it is also the audio, video, and the non-structured, unstructured data, and bringing those together.
So I can share two examples. One I actually mentioned previously as well this morning. I touched briefly on the GreenGov Challenge. This GreenGov Challenge happened in October, late October, 23rd, 24th of last year. And what it was an opportunity for us to use open data and invite civic coders, hackers, into the process of helping us to solve issues related to sustainability and promoting green government. We had, it was a modest effort in terms of data. We had approximately 60 data sets that came from a variety of different departments. For example, we had data sets that represented state-owned and leased facilities. We had data sets that represented fleet management and the age and mileage of cars within the state's fleet. We had a number of geographic layers that were provided through my office to help give some geographic context. But what was very interesting, and what really intrigues me about open data is this concept of pulling together data sets from very disparate locations to solve a problem or paint an entirely different picture of the scenario, right? So that contest went on for 2 days. And I mentioned earlier that the result was actually 4 applications that were delivered. And we were thrilled, 2 of those of which DGS wants to adopt to bring into full production to be able to measure fuel efficiencies and provide that to the public and internal to government in a scorecard fashion to show how's the state doing. So to take the temperature of how we're actually providing better fleet management, fuel management, and being greener as a state. The other is also related to sustainable purchasing. So how many products is a state actively engaged in contract with from green vendors? What's sustainable, what's not? Within that, a leaderboard was developed to show which department is doing well, which one isn't, sort of a name by shame sort of thing. but right, I mean, we're being transparent. We're sharing with you what it is that we have, and bringing the citizen into the dialogue and into the conversation. Savita also mentioned the release of ca.gov. That was released, I believe it was April 30th, 29th. And the marriage between data, open data, visualizations, and content was done for a very specific purpose, and that was to change the experience and the interaction fueled by data and information to the citizen. Some of the things that aren't apparent when you look at that site, and what will be architected even more so in the future, is that the state's open data platform is the foundation upon which ca.gov resides. So if you have an opportunity, look through the site, you'll see metrics and numbers and maps and data coming from that. That is and will be driven more so by the authoritative content that we receive and manage and curate through the open data platform. So for example, we'll use that that the ca.gov portal, not so much as a website of information, but a communication tool to be able to really communicate and connect with the audience through visualizations, through information, through multimedia, through content that's relevant and appropriate for the audience that we're trying to reach.
Great. Yeah, so actually this again brings me back to this image where what Scott is talking about is from just putting the data out there to the organization of the data for easy access, but taking a step further through visualization and understanding the user's intent and making it relevant to them, personalize it for them, is what is going to achieve the most benefit.
Yes.
Scott, again, if you could share with
Sure.
us some stories.
Sure. Well, I think, and to Scott's point and what you're describing, we sort of talked about it in a way that, like, open data, it's not necessarily a thing, right? It's a way of doing things. And I think that's what you're really describing, but in terms of the transparency place. So I'll just touch quickly on a couple of, I think, what were success stories for us. We talked a little bit about media. I think just having that easy open access, made for broader distribution on kind of key topics. I mean, what things that would typically have been driven probably by a phone call to track down a data set, now kind of allowed for story to be covered more widely. And I'm thinking of the measles outbreak that started in Disneyland. That was obviously a huge issue in California. We had immunization data that Department of Public Health had published to the Open Data Portal. So in very short order, we had major outlets, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and others, publishing stories about that with those data that were, again, easily accessible and not having to be chased down. So I think that was important. In terms of local engagement, we were very fortunate to partner with the California Healthcare Foundation, who actually provided all the funding up front for us to start our open data initiative. In addition, they had also kind of worked with us on building local relationships through a program of what we called Health Data Ambassadors in 5 cities in California. And we actually organized events like Scott's describing, codathons or developer challenges focused on local use of health and human services data to address kind of whatever local problems were. And I think there's some good results out of that. They were, again, really driven by the local needs and simply making use of what health and human service departments are collecting and maintaining as in the course of programmatic work. So there was a couple of interesting apps that came out of some of those. I think an example to share would be around WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, a very important program Department of Public Health manages. Simple mobile app that was developed against the WIC data that had been published about where to find WIC retailers, a little bit of information about eligibility, and contact information for the Department of Public Health to apply for eligibility. So again, simple, quick, but it's the kind of thing that typically our departments weren't going to engage in. So to be able to partner with local communities or civic tech folks to kind of solve those problems was a good way to go. And then the last piece I'll just share internally, something that was really unanticipated but especially helpful was as we worked through and with each department down the line, incrementally bringing aboard the 12 departments, we worked, we had an open data work group and just evolved that. And there's a tremendous amount of kind of peer-to-peer interaction that developed that hadn't been present before. I mean, again, as I mentioned, typically departments work in their silos. Understandably, we're delivering programs, and that's what you focus on. But that was a kind of an unexpected outcome that was present today, and I think a real benefit just to have folks engage with each other as a peer network and support each other in developing data assets. And it's allowed for much wider conversation about data and how we use data internally to better administer our own programs. So in addition to the transparency movement, I think just the benefit of having that conversation about the importance of using data every day in our programs has emerged.
Yeah, great. So basically that engagement is externally but as well as internally.
Absolutely.
And basically the codathons that you mentioned, I think it is external engagement leading to internal engagement.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's awesome. So where do you plan to take the CHHS initiative further?
So at this point, we're actually right in the process of moving in kind of a sustainable model. As I mentioned, we had been originally funded by the California Healthcare Foundation, so we actually have a model that we've framed and we'll be sustaining the open data portal and the program going forward. Internally, that's an important piece. I think we'll be looking to understand more and what communities, civic tech, media, what consumers of the data are looking for. So the federal government, who's been way out in front of this as well, I think have developed a demand-driven open data program, and so we're interested in sort of emulating that in some way and be able to satisfy kind of the emerging needs, of local communities in that regard. And then finally, I think we're within Health and Human Services, this has been a major initiative, and our Undersecretary has been our champion and our sponsor. We're looking to align our open data efforts with other key initiatives. In particular, our focus right now is aligning that with Let's Get Healthy California. So this is, again, a major initiative, kind of looking at the health and wellness of California, looking to make California one of the healthiest nations in the healthiest states in the nation. And included in that are a set of measures, driven by data, and so we're looking to put those in the portal and kind of align our efforts in terms of civic engagement around health innovations that are informed by data that again CHHS departments publish. So again, alignment of those initiatives so that they can be not managed separately, but really benefit from one another in terms of kind of leveraging resources and assets.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So, Jan, coming back to public pay, how would you compare basically public pay? You use the word transparency portal versus open data portal. If you could speak a little bit about that, and what do you think is the role of data storytelling?
Okay. Well, first of all, there's definitely a purist mentality regarding the definitions of open data and transparency. When we built the public pay website, we built it in-house. Some people call it an open data site, but it doesn't have APIs built into it.
Right.
The data is completely accessible and downloadable, but you can't do what-if scenarios like you can with the built-in business intelligence and save those scenarios. So I would say that's the primary difference between that and, for example, the open data site that we've built since we've been at the Treasurer's Debt Watch, where you can do all of that kind of querying with it. But I think the main thing that has been the theme of all of the transparency, we've done 2 transparency by technical definition and 2 open data sites, and the main thing is how do we engage with that citizen? We never want the experience where the citizen is coming and seeing a catalog of data catalog of data sets. The average citizen is going to be put off by that, and if they have to do more than 2 to 3 clicks tops, they're not going to spend any time there. And if it doesn't engage them or help facilitate what to look at next, our experience is people don't have a lot of information, the general public, about these financial figures. They're not going to spend the time to do their own data analytics if they're working from data catalogs. So for each of our sites, we've taken the approach at the very outset as we were just visioning what we wanted to do. How do we tell a story? First, what's the story we want to tell? And then how do we tell it? So for each of our sites that we've built, all 4 of them, we have graphics up front, and we have, here's what you're going to learn here. We put up a transparency site for Track Prop 30, and you may recall that was the proposition that Governor Brown had sponsored to ensure a secure level of funding for all of the schools in California. It was right on the heels of the Great Recession here, and so legislators had become creative in borrowing funds from one area to another, and so and lots of teachers were getting pink slips. So to ensure that the level of funding stayed constant for schools, Prop 30 was introduced. So Chung felt it was his responsibility as the controller at the time to track how much money is being secured for those schools, and then to have all of those counties of education down to the school districts provide plans of how they intended to spend that money, and then 15 months later provide the accountability for how they did spend it. So when you first land on that site, trackprop30.ca.gov, you'll see a blackboard, and it writes across it in chalk. So it's reminiscent of a school. So right away, we're trying to engage the citizen who lands there, and on that chalkboard, you're going to see some questions rotate about things you can learn on that site and how to get in there and engage. And again, we have a map of California, and then we have specific buttons that will take you into it. But we try to be contextual on how we tell that story and how that person is going to get to the data, because there's a much greater consumption and absorption if they understand the context of the data rather than just receiving data.
Got it. Perfect. So Scott, you're leading the efforts, not only the federated open data portal statewide, but also the innovation lab. So you also mentioned about the Green Gov Challenge, and that was a way to engage public, right? Are there any other innovative ways you're thinking of in terms of where you want to take the state next in this area?
In terms of the innovation lab?
Yeah, in terms of innovation lab and its role in open data.
Sure.
And data storytelling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo the comments that Jan made and Scott as well. Storytelling around, let's say, information, data moving to that form of information is so vitally important to convey and not confuse. So earlier on today, I sort of laid out a very higher level vision of what the Office of Digital Innovation and Technology Engagement gets into. And a big part of that is looking at innovation, looking at the engagement aspects of technology with citizens, and then open data. But one of the primary things that I'm very interested in is looking at how we can leverage non-conventional ways to be able to communicate the value of information to the folks that are our audience. One way that we're looking to achieve that is not only to continue to leverage these innovation meetups or codathons or hackathons. Some people, my security folks, kind of freak out when we say hackathons. Yeah, but being able to foster that community, because I really believe that government doesn't have all the answers. We need to understand the customer. That customer is a citizen. So just like any good business would understand the segment that they're trying to sell a product to, we need to understand what the citizen wants. So the Innovation Lab is going to give us that opportunity to experiment and build, develop, and then potentially deploy applications that speak directly to that audience, but using and leveraging purely open source technologies, and also looking back to our open data portal and tapping into some of those data stores that are authoritative, and beginning to develop and deliver meaningful solutions to citizens, to government, and then also business. I mean, we can't forget that, right? There's a government to business aspect that sometimes sort of falls by the wayside, but a lot of businesses do rely on the information that we produce and we provide. So providing it in easy and clear ways, developing APIs where business can tap into these data sets and build their own visualizations and tell the story as well, is vitally important. And that's a definite direction that we're moving towards.
Awesome. Yeah, so just to sum it up, again, I would appreciate your comments on this slide as well. So the way we look at data storytelling is really bringing together the data with visualizations, but also to provide context with narration. Together, those three elements tell the story. Now, that story is what engages people, let it be the government, communities, or external communities, general public, businesses, etc. And to make all of this happen, we need to rely on the quality of data, like Scott mentioned, the authoritative sources of data, making sure that there are data standards so that we can integrate data sources, etc., is critical. So to me, the engagement is both at the users of the transparency portals or visualizations, but also engagement with data providers becomes a critical part. So if you have anything to add to that, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. No, I definitely think that there's a key touch point between the provider and then the end goal of how we want to disseminate and manage information to the audience. One thing I failed to mention is, when we looked at building out this program related to open data for the state and looking at a statewide platform, we had to really truthfully take into account what is that audience. I think oftentimes projects are approached without really defining that succinctly. And it's such a broad range. I mean, it's from, my 7th grader that's going to write a report on, who knows what, to my mother, 70, well, I'll get it wrong, 72, but can get her way around, right? She understands some technologies, but she might want access to some information. It goes back again to the engagement point and being able to tell the story of how we want to show the visualization.
Yeah, and to tell the right story, you need to, as you rightly pointed out, understand who are the users, what is their intent, what questions they need answered, and so on. Yeah. So Jen, do you want to add?
So at the Treasurer's Office, in November, we launched an open data site called debtwatch.treasurer.ca.gov. And that presents $1.5 trillion in debt that California has issued over the last 30 years. And that issuance is from cities and counties and joint powers authorities and Mello-Roos and Mark-Roos districts and the city and the state. And people just aren't aware of how much debt California has until you see it in magnitude like that. And so the site engages people to interact with the data, and we want to be able to tell a story, and we want them to be able to visualize it. So again, you can go county to county and compare counties or compare cities and see how much debt they have in specific areas. But what you can't see is how much have they paid off, or what was it applied to. So the future for where we're going with Debt Watch, we currently have a bill out there called Senate Bill 1029, and the treasurer is asking all these local governments, tell us, when did you actually disperse the funds? Right now they report and they say, I received a bond issue, for example, to build the Golden One Center. A $300 million bond was issued last year, and you can find that on Debt Watch. Well, when did they disperse the funds? And were all those funds dispersed at the same time? And were they all dispersed for that purpose, or were other things paid for at that same time? And right now, we don't have that ability to tell that story unless this legislation passes, but that's part of transparency. And that's completing the picture, and that's the story we want to be able to tell with the open data site. So that's our future for Debt Watch.
Great, awesome. Scott?
So yeah, I think it's it's critically important in terms of engagement, and especially in local communities. And I'll speak to again the Let's Get Healthy California work. This was a task force that the governor launched several years ago, and out of it came a set of measures and goals, overarching goals to again increase the health and well-being of all Californians. And but in terms of engagement, I mean, it really is the storytelling. I mean, the data is important to understand where to focus. For example, we know opioid abuse and deaths are on the rise, obviously, but the story is important to understand, what can be done. For example, understanding what Marin County is doing to curb prescription drug abuse. It's a great story, and again, the data simply frames it, but the story is what's important in terms of the sharing and what other communities can replicate. What Orange County is doing, for example, in terms of food security. They're making arrangements so that unused meals from various organizations, catering, et cetera, actually get distributed to food banks, which is something that actually had ordinance didn't allow for that. So they changed the ordinance. So that's a story. So again, the data sort of frames it, but the stories are really what makes it an engaging opportunity for communities to collaborate, learn from one another, and again, move the bar forward on the health and well-being of Californians.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so with this, I would like to open for questions. So, you know. Yeah. So
Thank you, because I lost my voice last weekend, so this is great. It's all been very fascinating. Thank you very much. And beyond policy and program, I'm wondering to the technologies that were used for the storage and utilization of structured and unstructured data. Perhaps, Hadoop and Mongo and some of those tools, as well as the user interfaces. Perhaps you've done, you've partnered with COTS products, off-the-shelf products, as well as developed in-house .NET interfaces or Java type interfaces, and I'd like you to speak to those, please.
Sure,
Thanks.
yeah. So I can answer a little bit about that, and then so Symsoft as a company, we do help in bringing together content, data, and even applications at times. So we do rely on the open data portals and use the REST-based APIs that the open data portals provide in order to bring in that data and structure it for presentation. And bringing that in the context of a web content management system, so that you are integrating. So you're writing an article, but here is a widget you could add that provides you the data underlying, which is coming from some other sources. So that is one way. The use of Mongo and unstructured data, again, that is being used, but as you probably know, Mongo and those unstructured data stores are good for fast collection of data, but in order to process it at the kind of rear end, you still do need to rely on the analysis and so on. So our entry point when it comes to storytelling is really the data that we can work with directly in terms of business intelligence and visualizations and so on. But all what you described is what would get us there. So I'm sure Scott would have more to add.
Sure, I can add to that. So on a couple of fronts, specifically on CA.gov, we do have a Mongo database backend that helps us collect and maintain and manage some of that information, which for us is very exciting, because for Department of Technology, I believe that was the first sort of foray into leveraging Mongo for a very public, very exposed web portal, which was great. Other areas that we look at, so for our open data pilot, we leveraged a technology developed by a company called Socrata, open data platform. It's a hosted platform. Storage is done in AWS, so on and so forth. But hanging off of that are a lot of the visualizations and the business intelligence work has been managed by internal staff using tools from Esri and some open source tools as well. So going forward, beyond the pilot, we've been investigating different solutions. Of course, Socrata has been very beneficial. We've learned some great things, but there's also many other players in that space. One in particular is a platform called DCAN. DCAN is a Drupal-based open source open data platform that has proved to show a lot of value. Especially and specifically in telling the story. You're hearing that a lot, is telling the story of the information. Being able to leverage Drupal and some of the content management aspects of that has been very beneficial and is proving to be a very strong contender.
So we partnered with Symsoft on our first 2 transparency sites that we built ourselves, and they are SQL databases, and we used in-house skill sets and their expertise, and the next 2, By the Numbers and Debt Watch, we partnered with Socrata on, so our data is in the cloud with them, and we built the interstitial pages between us and them. And like Scott said, they are certainly not the only player out there. We are open to the cloud solutions by any vendor who has an offering there. And we found that they were far more economical and faster in launch time than what we built ourselves. So that would be where we would be focusing again.
I think that's a great point. And for us at Health and Human Services, again, we went with Socrata. The point I would share with you is it was important to us because, we knew we were going to be working across 12 different departments. And again, those departments, have mission and focus. So our interest was really in developing these repeatable processes for data governance. And so we actually, Socrata allowed us to not think about the technology and the solution. I mean, it is fully hosted, software as a service. So we were able to focus, and we did, our limited resources. I mean, this was all redirected effort and sort of peer-to-peer work between the departments. We focused on the process. Again, many of our data sets are sensitive, so we wanted to be sure that we had strong procedures and strong processes so that there was no chance that any protected health information were to be on the portal. So again, it's a different answer, I know, but we wanted to focus on the process and something that 12 departments that could participate in equally and have some confidence in what was going out into the open data portal. And so that's where we spent our time. And again, Socrata, I agree, there's other products, but it allowed us to focus on what we needed to focus on and not worry about the technical solution.
I might also add to that to Scott's point, focusing in on the process, that's where the most of our time and energy has been spent. The technology question, regarding open data, I think it's easily solvable. I don't think it's the biggest question that needs to be answered. The biggest question I feel that needs to be answered, and I think my panelists here as well have run into this, is evangelizing the benefits, educating people, outreach, connecting people, and building really a movement or a community around open data. Because to some it can be a little bit scary, like, wow, you're going to look at my data? What are you going to do with it? But expounding the benefits, again, the evangelical piece of that is extremely, extremely important. And then tying that back to the technology, having replicable processes, as Scott mentioned, that fit right into your governance process is absolutely vital.
Thank you so much for all the information you've shared. My question is twofold. The first one is on security. How have you been able to maintain your the open data, yet maintain security of the system and the data? And the other one is, what other challenges have you faced, and how have you been able to, resolve them?
Sure.
I'll jump in there. It can be a very contentious question, right? Security, cybersecurity, it's in the news every day. One thing to note here, though, is that when we say open data, this information's already publicly available, whether through a PRA or downloadable from a department's webpage. So the level of liability, I would consider to be relatively low in regards to purely open data that's already available to the public. Now, tailoring that back to from a security posture, and how do we maintain sort of the anonymous nature of some data sets that we have to manage. And I know the folks next to me have dealt with this a lot, is developing guidance, governance, standards, practice, and even to some degree policy around how you anonymize information. Health-related information for sure. I mean, got to be awfully careful with that. Fiscal-related information, criminal records, things have to be done according to law to scrub that information and make it less identifiable. And you run into an issue where, let's say that there's a medical condition that we might know someone may have, and they live in a census tract or census block boundary where there's perhaps 25 people that live in that. you have to make a judgment call. You have to understand how you want to aggregate information and how you want to represent that information, and really take an intelligent view at it. Because as I said before, when you can bring different data sets together, it's really difficult to understand what the potentiality or the possibilities are of some of the questions you might be able to ask, or the questions that might be answered from it. So you have to look at all those different aspects, not only from the cybersecurity of locking down the system and managing it, but truth be told, the data level tier is as equally important, if not more so to some degree, depending on the kind of information you're managing.
I'll just say what he said.
And
Pretty much it.
Agreed. I'll just add one thing. I think our biggest challenge, was addressing, I'll say privacy. And so was just to get our undersecretary, to green light the whole effort. And the way that we addressed that was, as Scott describes exactly, was developing a set of guidelines and procedures that we would follow that satisfied leadership that we would be taking the appropriate precautions. So those are available on GitHub if you're interested. It's CHS Open Data, just CHS Open Data on GitHub, and you can see our entire Open Data Handbook that addresses that.
Great. There was a question there. There was a question there.
Thank you. I have some questions that relate to the internal use of data. One is to try and define how to share best practices. I came to a conference a few months ago by the same organization and was really excited and wanted to apply a lot of those things. And then, you get back into your own department, and IT is not, when you're trying to solve a problem, they're not offering this array of things. They'll give you the cheapest licensed version of the software that's available. And then, you go through all these efforts, and then you find out that it's not mobile friendly. That this new ADA compliant fillable form you have can't be read by anyone on their iPad or something like that. And then the other part of it is how to share that information that we're collecting as an opportunity in other forms. So, for example, in Oregon, at every managed care visit for prenatal care, they're using it as an opportunity to do this 60-question survey to assess family well-being, identify risk factors, put them in touch with the services that they'll need as a way of preventing child abuse, which is a great opportunity. But how do we roll that into play in California? We're certainly a lot bigger giant than they are that way. It can happen through Medicare or the managed care programs or others, but have we explored opportunities to really take data gathering opportunities and share the knowledge internally?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, actually, it's fun. I just returned yesterday from Health Data Palooza, which is it's organized pretty much by the Federal Health and Human Services Department. So it includes CMS, who actually was the co-chair. So in terms of Medicare and Medicaid, I mean, they're very much driving the conversation. HHS has an Idea Lab, so an innovation group there. ONC obviously is a player. So, I mean, events like that allow for a lot of sharing of stories, and obviously the necessity is to bring those back and find a way to share and disseminate those at the state level. Again, for us, I think we've one avenue that we've invested in is this Open Data Work Group. Actually, several members are here today, and the Open Data Work Group is seated under a formal governance structure. So we have a governance structure across the 12 departments, and it goes back to your point about getting the right tools or support. I mean, so there is a place where folks can bring their interests or concerns or again share best practices, things like that. And if additional support is needed, those things can be shared up the governance structure, and as opposed to, perhaps in other circumstances, fall into a void. So, I mean, that's one place where we've focused. But, I think it's a good point in terms of how do we, benefit from state-to-state collaborations, and it's a challenge, clearly.
I might add to that conversation as well. Scott really touched on something that shouldn't be overlooked, and it's this idea of leveraging tools like GitHub. Scott and the organizations he works with have done a fantastic job of working in the open, and it's something that we take inspiration from in wanting to emulate that. So through the state's innovation lab, one of the main tenets is that we work in the open. So we'll be sharing not only code that is successfully developed and deployed to GitHub, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again, but also explaining and sharing our work in the open. I think it's vitally important, especially with the tone that we're trying to set around open data and transparency, is to be able to talk about the process and not be afraid to say, well, hey, this didn't work, but here's what we're going to do to try to fix this. So we're looking at several different avenues and channels to be able to communicate that. One in particular, something very simple like a blog. What's going on? What's happening? We're working on this major project. Let's share with you the successes, the failures, the setbacks, but also the big wins and who was responsible for that and who that benefits. I really think that helps engender a more open communication, not only with the people that we're working to develop this for, but also within government. Because I think a lot of times we're afraid to say, oh, we failed, what's going to happen? And many of us go into public service for that very fact, that we want to serve and we want to do it well. We're afraid to do that, afraid to fail. But we're providing an area where folks can actually do that, develop in the open, share wins, share successes, be human. We're all human, right? And really begin to develop and share that message. I think it'll be refreshing, I think.
Great. Awesome. That was refreshing.
Thank you.